At this critical moment, for our country, for our fellow Americans, it gives me so much pride, and I'm filled with so much gratitude to see so many good people of good conscience coming together, not just for a candidate, not for a political party, not only for themselves or their families, but for every single one of us in the United States of America. That is what brought us out here tonight. To Rabbi Nancy Kasten and Imam Omar Solomon and Reverend Waters, who I would follow into any battle, and who is so powerful and reminds us of who we are at our best, and who after the shootings on August 3rd in El Paso, Texas, came down to El Paso, Texas, and saw the white cross that had been erected in the name of Margie Record, the cross where I first met her husband, Tony, that Reverend Waters just told you about. 21 other white crosses with the names of those victims written in black paint on them, constructed just after the shooting at that Walmart. Every single one of them draped in rosaries and flowers and prayers and notes, and mementos, and anything any one of us could give to the memories of those who were taken in an act of hatred and racism and terror. But we in El Paso, we in the state of Texas, we in the United States of America will refuse to allow that act of terror to define us. Instead, it is the courage, it is the love, it is the kindness exemplified by the people of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, and right here in Dallas and Fort Worth and North Texas. That is what will define us. And our community, a community of immigrants and the sons and daughters of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees from the world over. Though it may be the differences between us and between that community and a white majority in America that drove that killer more than 600 miles with a weapon designed for use on a battlefield in war that is devastatingly effective at killing people on that battlefield, tearing them apart on the inside, putting them down so that they can never get up again. But it is those very differences in El Paso and here in Texas and throughout the country that make us stronger and more successful and safer than we ever would have been otherwise. I am so proud of my community, of this state and this country at this moment. I am so proud of you for standing up and standing together. And standing against that fear that Donald Trump, the man in the White House who holds the highest position of public trust in the land, that fear that he's trying to use against us, that fear that he directed and drove down to El Paso, Texas, that fear that claimed the lives of 22 Americans. We, those of us here together, standing to be counted, are the answer to that fear. You know, El Paso, Texas, and those three of you from El Paso, you know what I'm talking about. There's a story I want to tell you. This undocumented immigrant, more than 100 years ago, named Marcelino Serna, born in Chihuahua, came to El Paso to work, to get ahead, to do better for himself and his family, just like all of us want to do better for ourselves and our families. But he was also importantly called to do better for this country and for all of us. And when the United States of America entered the First World War, Marcelino Serna entered the United States Army. And when his drill sergeant discovered that he was not a citizen, he said, "Serna, you don't have to do this. Every single man in this unit is going over to France. But not every man who goes over will come back home to Texas or to El Paso. You don't have to do this. This is not your fight." And Serna, like any good American would, said, "No, this is my country, and I'm willing to put my life on the line for America." And he went across the Atlantic, served with distinction in the fields of France, came back the most highly decorated Texan to serve in all of World War I. And in a small town just outside of El Paso called Tornillo, we just constructed a new bridge connecting the United States with the country of Mexico at a time that some would want to build cages for kids or walls to divide us. We're building bridges to connect us. I gotta tell you, all of you, from this part of Texas, from all parts of Texas, not only are you here tonight, standing up to show the rest of the country what we are made of, standing up against this president and against this fear, but last year, in a state that previously had been 50th in the country in voter turnout, not because we love our democracy any less than anyone else in any other part of the country, but literally we were drawn that way. Based on your race, your ethnicity, you might have been drawn out of a congressional district to diminish the power of your vote or the likelihood that your voice would ever be heard. But not a single one of us stood for that. And instead, we stood up and brought others into our democracy, had a record turnout last year. Young people turned out at a 500% increase in early voting from the last midterm. The people of this community elected Colin Allred to the United States Congress. And in Houston, Texas, 17 African American women elected to judicial position of power. You made that happen. Y además, you ensured that the 38 electoral college votes here in Texas can be won and can put Donald Trump away forever. And ensure that this country lives up to its full potential, reveals its true genius and promise, and it will be Texas leading the way. And I understand there are some who came from outside of Texas, from California and Nevada and Tennessee and Kentucky and Ohio. And someone who started their drive a week ago just yelled out Alaska. And what it reminds me of is more than a year ago, when we discovered that this president, through a zero-tolerance policy, was taking children from the arms of their parents by force, if necessary, deporting that mother back to the very country from which she fled, in many cases to a certain death in the deadliest countries, not just in the Western Hemisphere, but on planet Earth today. That child initially placed in a cage and then removed to a tent city in that same town of Tornillo that I just told you about. We sent out the signal to the rest of Texas and to the rest of the country, and in under 24 hours, more than 1,000 of you showed up, driving the distance, not only to bear witness, but to testify to our fellow Americans just what was being done in our name. And because you understand that in a democracy, we cannot just accept that this was the decision of one man, as evil as he may be, but the responsibility in this great republic lies on each and every single one of us. And standing together, united, Democrats, Republicans, independents alike, we stopped that zero tolerance policy. And that tent city outside of El Paso in Tornillo no longer exists. That is what we can do together, and that is what we are doing together tonight. Inspired by one another, and I hope inspiring the rest of the country. This is a rally against fear. We know that in those communities that have hosted a rally by Donald Trump, we've seen hate crimes on the rise more than 200%. In fact, in El Paso, Texas, preceding that massacre and that act of terror in August, there was a Donald Trump rally in February. We cannot sit idly by and in our silence be complicit in the violence and the terror and the racism that exists in this country at unprecedented levels in our lifetimes. And so together, we stand together and we stand against fear. Every kind of fear in America today. And tonight, I want to make the case that there are three kinds of fear against which we must guard and stand against and make sure that we overcome and defeat. The first is this fabricated fear of the president, who wants us to be afraid of one another. A president, when he was a candidate, who said that he would ban all Muslims, all people of one religion, from the shores of a country that is comprised of people from all traditions of faith, all walks of life, every single country on the planet. It is hard outside of the Third Reich to find another example in modern human history of a leader of a modern democracy saying that one people of one religion are inherently dangerous or disqualified or defective. And yet that's what our president did. The same president who described Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, though they commit crimes at a far lower rate than anyone that is born in this country. A president who not only caged those kids, but described asylum seekers who survived a 2,000-mile journey, much of that on foot, some of that atop a train known as the Beast or La Bestia. And here, when they thought they had reached salvation and refuge and asylum, instead they found their worst nightmare, because this president described them as an invasion, an infestation. He called them predators and animals. He tried to make them less than human so that we would treat them less than human. A president who wants to make us afraid of women of color who hold power in this country, asking for women of color duly elected by their constituents to the United States Congress to go back to their home country, though this is their home country. And what he says does not just offend our sensibilities. It fundamentally changes us as a country. The day after he signed an executive order attempting to ban Muslim travel to the United States, the mosque in Victoria, Texas, was burned to the ground. When he railed and warned about invasions of caravans and asylum seekers, and then entertained the notion that wealthy Jewish Americans were financing them, A gunman with a weapon of war walked into a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and began to shoot the congregants there. We lost the lives of 7 children seeking asylum in this country in our custody and care. The wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet. And this is how we treat the most vulnerable and defenseless and desperate among us. This is what is happening through the false bullshit fear of Donald Trump after and we cannot stand for that fear because we must stand for those who've been the victims of that fear. And again, I come back to El Paso, Texas, and not just those who were killed or those who are still recovering from their wounds, really wounds of war, but an entire state that now walks as though they have a target on their back. This is the second kind of fear, the real fear that people feel. Univision did a poll in Texas of the Latinx community, and they found that more than 80% of respondents fear they will be the victims of a mass act of terror based on their perceived immigration status or their country of national origin. If I were Mexican American in Texas, I might be afraid as well. In fact, if in this country I loved differently than the majority, looked differently than the majority, prayed differently than the majority, I too may have been afraid. If I were the son of an immigrant who dropped me off at school, and I had no idea if I would see him at the end of the day, whether he would be detained or deported back to a country I've never known, I too may be afraid. If I were a gay man in this state where I could legally be fired, I might be afraid for my job. If I were a trans woman of color in a state and a country where trans women of color are being killed with complete impunity, I too may be afraid, and that's a real fear. If I were a public educator, a school teacher, paid so little that I'm working a second or third job out of my own pocket, not only decorating the classroom, providing school supplies for the kids who've forgotten them, but also buying that warm dinner for the kid on free and reduced breakfast and lunch so that she has something to go home to, buying a new set of clothes for the kid who shows up in the same set of clothes every day, understanding that his ability to learn is tied to his sense of self-worth. I might be afraid if I understood that though we lose 40,000 of our fellow Americans to gun violence every year, though we see school shootings like the one that we experienced here in Texas, that Rhonda and Tyler experienced in Santa Fe, Texas, we have lifted not a finger for universal background checks or red flag laws or ending the sale of assault weapons in this country. I too may be afraid. My children were black, and I understood what was happening in this very community. Not even a week ago, Tay Jefferson shot in her own home by someone sworn to serve and protect her and everyone without regard to the color of their skin, in the same community where Botham Jean was shot in his own apartment, again by a white police officer. Too many black men and women being killed by those entrusted with the use of force with complete impunity and without consequence. I too may be afraid. If I were a veteran who had served this country in combat and came back with the signature wounds of war like post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury or military sexual trauma, and because we have not fully funded the VA, and not held up our end of the bargain, and I could not get the care that I needed, and knew that in this country, 22 veterans a day, every single day, take their own lives, I might be afraid. If I cared about the Constitution and our democracy and the future of this country, and I saw that my president was committing crimes and breaking the law with complete impunity and without consequence, I may be afraid. And if I lived in Houston, Texas, where there have been 500-year floods in just the last 6 years, knowing full well that we're not good for the next 2,000 years, but that these floods, these storms, these disasters, caused not by God, nor by Mother Nature, but by us, our excesses, our emissions, our inaction in the face of the facts and the science and the truth, we're only going to become more frequent, more damaging, and more deadly. I may be afraid. And as an American, you can be forgiven for being afraid that in the face of the greatest set of challenges that this country has ever known, that this planet has ever faced, that we may very well miss this moment. As divided, as polarized, and as afraid as so many people are, the future, the generations that follow us are counting on us now at this moment. And so we must defy not only that fear that people feel that is for real in their lives, but this third kind of fear. A failure to do the right thing because it's not popular, because it does not poll well, because it does not follow our status quo or the political conventions of the day. No more weak stuff in the United States of America. We stand up for the right thing, and we do it regardless of the political consequences each and every single time. We face down that fear, and we are unafraid to believe in ourselves, to believe in one another, to believe in this country again. And we decide that there will be no fear as we rewrite this country's immigration laws in our own image, legalizing America, beginning with more than 1 million dreamers by making them U.S. citizens in this country. Deciding that a racism in our criminal justice system is also a racism in our economy, is also a racism in healthcare, is also a racism in education in America. And ladies and gentlemen, we say to the rest of this country, it is no longer sufficient not to be racist. Each one of us must commit to being anti-racist in America. To my friend, Laura Lehman, who I saw earlier today, who has spent the last month with her son, Vic, in a hospital room. Vic, one of the most beautiful children you will ever meet, but medically complex and medically expensive to take care of. I want to make sure that we help her face those fears by guaranteeing that not only do we treat every single American with dignity and respect, especially those living with disabilities who face so many barriers in this country today, but that we decide that we will commit ourselves to guaranteed, high-quality, universal health care for every child, every woman, every man, primary health care, prescription health care, in a state whose largest provider of mental health care services is the county jail system. That means mental health care without co-pays in Texas and the United States. And it also means that every woman makes her own decisions about her own body and has access to the care to make that happen. Without fear. And to those veterans, I want to make sure that we fearlessly have their back and are there for them when they come back to this country. Make sure that we pay our debt of gratitude, not just by slapping their backs and tipping our hats and thanking them for their service, but investing in homes for every homeless veteran in America, health care for every veteran in America. And then, if we really want to support them, and if we're really inspired by their service, then we commit ourselves to ending the wars that we are in and not going to war as a matter of foreign policy in the United States of America going forward. those fears about a planet that is warming faster than its ability to sustain human life, I want to be fearless as we make sure that we completely free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, embrace renewable energy technology, the high skill, high wage, high value jobs that come with them, meet our commitments to this and every generation that follows. That is our opportunity. We are the inheritors of the service and the sacrifice and the commitment that preceded ours here today. I remember recently visiting Gainesville, Texas in Cook County. I knew there was going to be somebody from Cook County. So, to the gentleman in the way back, you're familiar with the historic Santa Fe train depot. And as we went to go see it for ourselves, someone from the community shared with us that in 1944, an entire division of young Americans, who knows what party they belong to, what faith they practice, who they loved in their lives, how many generations their families had been here, or whether they just got here the day before, like Marcelino Serna back in World War I. But they all trained, they all boarded trains in that depot that took them to ships that crossed the Atlantic, brought them to England, where they boarded transports that would take them across the Channel, where they would land in June of that year on the beaches in Normandy. Many of them never to return to Gainesville or to Texas or to this country or to their families. In that same depot, 4 years later, Harry Truman, down in the polls, a long shot to many people in the country, conducting the last stop of his whistle-stop tour in the state of Texas. He arrived at that same train station. And that is the same president who reminded us that this country was not built on fear. No, America was built on courage, on imagination, on an unbeatable determination to do the job at hand. That is the America that I see here tonight. Unbeatable. I see a fearless America. It is up to us to make sure that we are worthy of that sacrifice, of that service, of that example, worthy of one another, and importantly, I'm thinking, Amy, of Ulysses and Molly and Henrik. Worthy of our children because they're counting on us at this defining, decisive moment of truth. Texas, are you ready? Let's get after it and let's get it done. Thank you. Office, those in the public arena who are contending to represent you or are already in positions of public trust to join us up here on the stage. So let's hear it for everyone who's getting out there, getting after it. I love you guys. I love you.